tyranny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, August 7th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Micha Frazer-Carroll, columnist at The Independent, author of Mad World, The Politics of Mental Health. Also on the program today, Donald Trump seeking a more white venue for his conspiracy trial.
Intellectual diversity.
The most white venue.
Meanwhile, prosecutors ask the judge for a protective order from Donald Trump's inciting posts on Truth Social.
Free speech.
Fifth Circuit finds lifetime voting bans for ex-felons to be unconstitutional under the cruel and unusual prohibition. State court finds Texas abortion ban to be too restrictive. Republican group sues the Biden administration to stop loan cancellation for 800,000 people, but could completely undermine the Department of Education's ability to cancel any student debt. Biden expected to permanently ban Grand Canyon mining. UAW negotiations coming to a head as a strike looms. Meanwhile, nothing comes of the WGA AMPTP meeting, as actors and writers are still on the picket lines. And a Republican right-wing darling, Richard Hanania. Did I say that right?
Sure.
Whatever. Turns out to be a secret-ish Nazi-nia.
So those are the people you expect.
Israeli National Security Chief calls settlers suspected of murder heroes in a Praise for Slay program. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us at the beginning of a week in August.
Was that supposed to be Nazi? Nazinia?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I tried to draw a parallel between his last name, Hanania. Am I saying that wrong?
Nazinia.
I always thought it was Hanania, but...
I mean, Hanania.
Like inane.
The idea that I can just get the number of syllables correct is a huge achievement for me. And then I tried to sort of create a parallel with the secret-ish Nazi-nia.
It's better than Glenn Greenwald tried to pronounce Ocho Cinco on his show, which Bradley sent to me earlier. We can play that later potentially. So you fared
I would
better.
not want to get into any type of competition about pronouncing people's names or words. I'm not going to do that. That's like, I might as well. I don't know what else I could be worse at.
It's like challenging Usain Bolt to a sprint match.
Yes. I mean,
Sprint
that would
match?
be,
Yeah.
sprint match. Classic sprint match.
Tune into ESPN.
Let's get to this. We've got a lot to cover today. I should say this is it's a little bit of a crazy week for me. Daughter's birthday. She's starting to get ready to go to college, and I didn't realize that she would be going around this time, and we got a vacation, and it's things are a little bit nuts. So bear with us. But
I remember driving to college as a freshman, like with my car all loaded up and everything. That's wild.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it seems
well,
like yesterday.
Mila is not going to get a car, and so we'll be taking her. much to her chagrin, she is not. She is asked on multiple occasions.
I poured salt in the wound there. Sorry, Milo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I said it is possible that she will get a car, but probably not when she's in college. I mean, she might.
Right.
We'll see, because the Sub is about to hit. It's starting to go into 100,000 miles, and I'm more like around you give the kid the car around 150,000 miles type
all
of
right.
guy. But we'll see.
Miles, it's time to start doing donuts in the parking lot.
Exactly.
Drive up that mileage.
Well, fortunately, it has all-wheel drive, so she can't do that. All right, let's get into this. Was it on Friday? What day was it? I guess it was Friday. Donald Trump, we played a clip of Donald Trump walking out of his limo as he's about to leave Washington after he's been indicted. And the first thing he does when he comes up to the microphone is he says, this place is garbage. It's dirty, infested, Washington, D.C., decrepit.
Yeah.
And
So much worse than when I was here.
I speculated at the time, this is part of the defense strategy. They're going to start to, and let's be clear. The defense strategy is ultimately, I must get elected president so that I can figure out a way of ending the appeal that would be on me in terms of the timing. Okay. I actually spoke to a former U.S. attorney the other day about this in terms of the timing, and he thinks it's going to go maybe pretty quick. And the real question is going to be whether Trump is allowed out on bail.
Wow.
But I'm more convinced that he will be let out on bail. With all that said, so that's the overriding strategy that Trump has, right? Where it's, I need to get elected. And part of that, which dovetails with his criminal defense strategy, which is really, again, his primary criminal defense strategy is get elected president and end this prosecution. He's going to claim, we said after that moment when he got in front of the microphone, because that was planned. Let's be clear. That wasn't just him shooting off the cuff. That they're going to argue he can't get a fair trial because there's too many black people in Washington, D.C., and the judge is a black woman. And, that was my sort of just speculation. And, ladies and gentlemen, 3 days later on Face the Nation, his attorney, 2 days later, had this to say.
I can tell you that in 40 years of practicing law, on a case of this magnitude, I've not known a single case to go to trial before 2 or 3 years.
Understood. Are you still going to pursue a change of venue?
Absolutely. We would like a diverse venue, a diverse jury.
Do you have any expectation that will be granted?
That reflects the characteristics of the American people. It's up to the judge. I think West Virginia would be an excellent venue to try this case.
Speaking of the judge,
to D.C. and a much more diverse.
Understood. Speaking of the judge, earlier this week, your client, the former president.
First off,
follow up, please.
Speaking of arrested, Major Garrett should get arrested.
Good
is
Lord.
it really irrelevant anything that your guest says because you've had your written out questions?
Yeah, why not just send him a questionnaire if you're not going to respond to anything?
It's so ridiculous.
I mean, what do you mean by diverse? What do you mean by diverse?
Understood,
Is the easiest follow up. Because clearly, if we're talking about racial diversity, West Virginia would not be the place to go, one of the whitest states in the country.
Well, what is it about West Virginia that is diverse? there's been a lot of things I've heard about West Virginia described. They're not racial. One can only imagine. But a more diverse jury in one of, if not the, probably one of, definitely one of, the whitest states in the country.
Top 5, definitely.
And certainly one of the most sort of conservative states in the country as well. And it is just laughable. And frankly, they know they're not going to get this venue change. It's absurd. And because to acquiesce to their venue change, you're going to have to argue that there's something fundamentally un-American about the people who live in the capital city. of the country.
There is something un-American about it in the fact that they really don't have any representation, but I don't think that's what they're referring to.
That's true. We want to change in venue to protest the failure of Congress to make them a state. But this is this is what we're going to hear. And it's just going to get worse. People should be, ready for this, because this is literally an existential threat to Donald Trump as far as he's concerned. He needs to win the presidency to stay out of jail. That is what he is convinced of. No one can see into the future, but that is a reasonable conclusion for him to make.
He was already talking about preemptively pardoning himself, there were rumors that was being discussed before, obviously, he was forced out of office on January 20th.
Yeah, because nobody knows, if you could offer a preemptive pardon on what.
It's unprecedented.
And but this is existential for him. So it's going to start with this, but look at how it's ramped up in just 2 days. They're getting more and more explicit. If Major Garrett was not so tied to the questions in front of him, he might have said, "What makes West Virginia more diverse? Can you explain this to me?"
Yeah. And by the way, Trump has tried this before. If you recall, was it about the wall, or was it about some of his other immigration policies? I forget. But there was a judge assigned who had Hispanic or what was it?
He was Mexican, yeah.
Mexican.
Well, no, he wasn't Mexican. I mean, his parents,
right.
He was of Mexican descent.
And it was litigation related to the wall, and he was saying how he couldn't get a fair trial in that. In that case, never mind the fact that the documents trial is an appointee of his, and she's clearly ruling in his favor and has before. That's not rigged at all.
It wasn't even the wall, which you would think because he attacked Judge Gonzalo Curiel, but that was over a Trump University San Diego fraud case.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Mexicans
don't Mexicans don't like fraud. Completely biased against fraud.
Everybody knows this.
We'll be talking to Micha Frazer-Carroll, a columnist at The Independent, author of A Mad World, The Politics of Mental Health, in just a minute. But first, a word from one of our listeners who started a leftist-owned worker collective called IAC Laser Engraving. Ryan Lubin started this in September of 2021. His company is democratically structured, ensure that any hierarchies are justified and efficient. They use sustainably sourced materials coupled with extremely energy efficient laser technology to bring you some really unique gifts and products and puzzles and whatnot, stuff you will not find anywhere else. Your purchase of their items not only gets you a one-of-a-kind product, but it also goes directly into supporting a business model that is structured around compassionate and worker-centered care, as opposed to the more traditional and predatory, authoritarian, capitalist businesses that are all around us. You've seen stuff in the past, like we've had puzzles, and I'm looking at that owl and the Sasquatch. And Saul has an astronaut in his room now. These two may be two of my favorites. I love the astronaut too, but this first is a fox.
I haven't seen that one yet.
No,
wow.
The painting is really what is doing this for me. Fox has 5 hand-painted, hand-glued layers. I don't know if you can see how, the depth of this. It's layered. And the 3-dimensional design inside provides an endless amount of detail. You're going to notice something different every time you look at this. It's available on their website for only $75. And it makes the perfect addition to your home, or a great gift for your loved ones, or maybe, if you are lucky, your dorm room. Mila?
Ooh.
I'm not promising anything. Although, this I think is my absolute favorite. This one just it feels like summer to me. This is a honeycomb. It is a 9-layer design, as you can see, dripping with awesomeness. You can get this honeycomb from IAC Lasers, available for only $75 at IAClasers.com. Also, don't forget, they do puzzles, but even better, they do custom puzzles. So if it's like somebody's anniversary, or I don't know, somebody's birthday, or you got a couple of cats that you love, what could be dogs,
or that,
I don't know, any type of animal. You send them a picture, they will turn it into a custom wooden puzzle in a custom engraved wooden box. Beautiful stuff. As always, visit IAClasers.com. Use the coupon code majority10 at checkout. You will save 10% on your order. They've also updated their site recently, so if you visited in the past, you want to visit again, check out all the new products. Again, that's IAClasers.com. Use the coupon code majority10. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Micha Frazer-Carroll, columnist at The Independent, author of Mad World, The Politics of Mental Health. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. It's a real pleasure to welcome to the program Micha Frazer-Carroll. She is a columnist at The Independent, author of Mad World, Politics of Mental Health. Micha, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So your book basically, I mean, it does a lot of things. It gives a history of how we have treated broadly. I mean, a lot of it's focused obviously on England, mental health, and then goes into sort of like sort of defining, or examining how we define mental health, and all of the sort of, I guess, the complications associated with that and the implications of diagnosis, all set, in the backed up of the sort of capitalist system that we work in. Let's just start though with, and also we should say you have a personal story as well as to this. Why don't we start actually there a little bit with like how you came to this topic, and how you came to the understanding of this topic through your own personal experience.
Yeah, definitely. So this is something I grappled with a bit with this book, because I felt, to what extent do you put yourself in your own work when you're writing about politics? But I did think it felt really important to kind of locate the position, like, where am I speaking from? What's my experience? How did I come to this? And for me, I had an experience of dissociation, which is sometimes the type I experience, sometimes called depersonalization, which sounds really weird, but basically I woke up one day and I kind of felt like I wasn't real. And it's a bit like, when something really stressful or traumatic happens and you're like, oh, I feel like a bit out of my body, or like, I don't quite remember, like it kind of went by in a blur. It was like that, but it was kind of 24/7 and ended up lasting for a number of months. And it sounds very poetic and metaphorical, but I experienced things like I would look in the mirror and genuinely feel like I didn't recognize myself. I didn't feel like it was me. My memory was kind of all weird. I felt like I couldn't really tell the difference between dreams and real life, things like that. So it was quite a kind of dream state. And like I said, it went on for a really long time. And it's only when I started to do a bit of kind of research and kind of typing in things like, I don't feel real on the internet, that I discovered that there's a name for it, and that other people experience it too, and that actually it's quite closely related to really, really high anxiety levels. So that was kind of an interesting experience for me in understanding how a label or a diagnosis in some ways can give you greater understanding or kind of bring you together with other people who had like a similar experience. And I think after this mental health crisis, I became, I think, quite interested in the social and political dimensions of both my experience, but I was also a student at university at the time. And, that's a very stressful time in life for a lot of people. And a lot of students around me were also experiencing mental health problems. And increasingly, I kind of thought I wanted to draw on both what I went through and the people around me were going through. And started doing some kind of journalism. I started up a magazine, which was on the topic of mental health, and also doing some kind of student organizing around mental health. So that's my entry point.
Well, and one of the interesting things about, the things that I think one of the reasons why we wanted you on the show was that this is, in part, anyways, an argument that that mental health should be more politicized. And was that your initial, did you come to that notion of what was the process of it going from, this is something I'm personally experiencing, to this is actually a greater political issue in the context of our society?
Mm-hmm. I think it was kind of a complicated journey. I think often when we look back on our memories and life experiences, you might kind of have an inkling of the kind of story that surrounds it. But obviously when we look back, we kind of sometimes go over the story or kind of create or understand new stories around what happened. And I think it was probably the year or so following that I looked back and I realized that, in my personal life, I was experiencing quite a few different traumatic things at the time. I was quite isolated, as a lot of students are. I think I didn't have much of a caring community. And I think also the structures that surrounded me, at university, it was this thing of, you constantly have to be working, you've got essay deadlines, every 10 minutes, it was a really stressful time in life. And I think that I started to kind of look back. And I think it was also maybe my experiences, as a person of color. I was living in a very white city. And experiencing racism as well. I think when I started to look back, I kind of more clearly understood what were actually all of the stresses that were surrounding me during this experience. And I think the story that I now kind of understand for myself is that those stresses were really contributing to kind of my experience of mental distress. And that's something that's very kind of well evidenced with depersonalization, is that it's closely correlated with stress, trauma, and things like this.
And we should say the sort of, at least parts of the catalysts associated with this are political issues. And then, so it's both on the sort of the generation in terms of generating these problems, but also on the resolution. There are political issues on both sides of it, as well as situated in the middle of how you're categorized and how you're stigmatized and how you're treated by society at that time. Let's go back and just give us a little bit of history as to how the development of all this, and to the extent that you can, how much of it is paralleled in the United States. It doesn't necessarily match up. Obviously, your healthcare system is very different, or at least the delivery of it, and the access to it is very different than it is over here, but in some ways there's some consistencies, unfortunate ones probably.
Definitely. And I'm so glad that you bring capitalism into the room, because this is, a really central argument that I make in my book, that the capitalist economic system is really inextricably intertwined with our mental health and our experiences of treatment. And one way I tried to trace this, like you mentioned, is by looking at the history of mental health. Specifically, I look at it in the UK, partly because the UK is where the world's first asylum was, what they used to call lunatic asylums. And it is quite strange that a lot of this history is paralleled very closely in the US, the development of asylums. So basically, kind of before the Industrial Revolution and the dawn of capitalism, a lot of people who experienced what was then called madness were people who were integrated in the local community. They were often cared for by their families or other community members, and they were often given kind of money to also, for their families to look after them in the home. But then when you see capitalism emerging, you get lots of people obviously being pushed into factories and factory work. In England, we had the introduction of something called the Poor Laws, which took away that money that allowed for people to be cared for in the community. And you also got people who were unemployed pushed into like workhouses and institutions like this and kind of forced to work when previously they would have been unemployed. And so this kind of fractured this community-based kind of way of living and meant that people became very atomized and people couldn't kind of stay in the home and look after their relatives who would have been called mad at the time. And so when you get people being sent into work like this and money being stripped away, one of the outcomes of this is, well, what do you do with the people who were previously like needed to be cared for kind of full time in the home? They need somewhere to go. And that's when we see kind of this huge expansion and explosion in numbers of people being admitted to asylums. And if you look at the history, like some of the reasons that people were admitted to asylums are also really dubious and really political. You know, you have people in the records being admitted for things like politics, novel reading, hatred of spouse, things like this. And I think that points towards how who we think of as being mad or sane is also like, it always sits within a political context. But yeah, so you get lots of people being sent into asylums into kind of the 20th century. And then I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about neoliberalism, but when we see kind of the dawn of neoliberalism, we see, you know, politicians like in the UK, we had Margaret Thatcher. In the US, it was Reagan, who really pioneered the closure of these institutions, which many people, you know, we can look back and say in many ways, deinstitutionalization and releasing people back into the community is in many ways a good thing. But actually, obviously, these politicians didn't really care about the well-being of people. They cared about.
I mean, that is, I mean, for me, having grown up in that era, the Reagan era, I just remember that it's a classic. It's a two-part process. It's just we're just going to do the first part.
Can I just ask before we move to the second part, how gendered were these initial institutionalizations? How did they fall along racial lines as well, I guess, from your perspective in the UK?
Mm-hmm. So in the UK, I guess like our system, you know, the way that colonialism operated, lots of Black people would have been in the Caribbean rather than in the UK. But there were trends, for example, and this also is mirrored in the US, of, you know, there was a diagnosis called drapetomania, which was suggested to be applied to Black people. And the symptom was running away from the plantation. And so obviously you can see again that this is a very racialized category, entirely shaped by kind of the political expectations of Black people at the time. But women being incarcerated in asylums was very common. You know, you saw a lot of spouses sending their wives to asylums. You could be admitted for reasons like not wanting to have children or not being, you know, the right kind of woman. Hysteria obviously was a really gendered category. So yeah, it did very much operate along these lines.
I just want to get like, you know, if you can maybe just talk a little bit about the sequencing. You open the asylums because as basically as a form of social reproduction, right? Like we can't get workers if they are bound at home to care for people who maybe they've got to keep an eye on, one of the kids or one of the cousins or one of the uncles or grandpa, whatever it is. And so that's a function of social reproduction. But now you have these asylums there and essentially a new filtering system of determining who is, you know, normal. And that filtering system is how productive can you be in this new sort of context? I mean, so like the drapetomania, which is essentially like you don't want to be a slave anymore, or you're actively fighting against being a slave, seems to me to be also, I mean, in addition to just in and of itself being, you know, completely a huge indictment on how, you know, mental health is applied in this context. But it also is like, you know, one of those sort of like extreme examples of if you can't work or you're stressed under work or you don't like going into work, at one point, like you become a non-productive member of society in a way that it's very easy to label you as having some type of mental disorder. And you go like, how much of that, were there waves of the way that the, sort of madness was applied?
Absolutely. I think you touched on so many important points, the point of social reproduction. So like there were different trends in how psychiatrists or people who kind of worked at these asylums, how they tried to approach and categorize madness and how they tried to treat it as well. So there was a big wave kind of towards the end of in the 19th century, which was called moral treatment. And the idea of moral treatment centered around, actually, maybe we need to get people to like occupy themselves and to occupy their minds and to therefore work more. And so you have lots of people kind of producing toys, shoes, books, things like this. And we still see this, right, in like the prison system as well today, people being forced into labor. And this was seen as kind of a potential cure. Obviously, that didn't really work very well for most people. For various reasons, that system kind of collapsed. But you see subtly again this idea that the definition of sanity or being healthy is so closely tied to being able to work and be exploited. And you also see when we look at the 20th century, we see this kind of back and forth between biological approaches, social approaches, biological approaches, but kind of a uniting trend that comes up again towards the end of the 20th century is there was this big kind of biological resurgence and revolution in terms of how psychiatry approached mental health. And so they kind of went from this more psychoanalysis-based way of thinking about it to this really kind of disorder, individual illness, like it's a biological problem approach. And around this time, you kind of start to see symptoms and things creeping in to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is the manual they use to diagnose mental illness. You see the current edition we have mentions work almost 300 times. And so you can see being able to work, and you'll see this with diagnoses like depression, for example. One of the number one things is, does it interfere with your ability to go to work, to go to school, to go about your daily life? And so you see that work kind of is one of the central kind of principles under which we decide what health is and what illness is. And you see this as well in treatment today. So as you point out, you've got the people who are just warehoused in separate places because society's kind of decided you are not going to be a viable, exploitable worker. And then you've also got, a lot of the treatments that we have in the UK, for example, you are going to get the cheapest possible treatment when you go to our healthcare system. So that will probably be medication, or you might get CBT. And both of these approaches, they're not very person-centered in the way that they're actually enacted. They're basically asking, can we get you back to a position where you can go into work? And you see, people who are in the benefits and system and stuff, sometimes being kind of pushed into going to therapy and things like this to basically get you back on the production line, which is often the place that's actually making us unwell in the first place.
What about those kind of like secondary methods of enforcing social reproduction in the way that, say, homosexuality during the 20th century was it kind of roped into these diagnoses of mental disorders and health and things like that? And I think you can draw some parallels to now with I guess gender dysphoria is now the outdated term, but that's not so distant, right? I mean, that was still being used in the previous DSM, whatever, before it was just updated.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. This is something that I look at quite a bit in the book, in the mid 20th century, when you've got, the civil rights movement, you've also got the gay rights movement, you see a lot of people, these movements also starting to become critical of psychiatry and how kind of people are categorized as orderly or disorderly. And there was obviously a big push in the gay rights movement in the 1960s towards depathologizing homosexuality. And I think we often look back on this as like a straightforward kind of like, this is one of the biggest victories of the movement, homosexuality no longer being categorized as an illness. But I think it's really important to also look at, okay, what happened when this took place? So this took place during a time where, like I said, psychiatry was being really widely criticized across society. And at that moment, the American Psychiatric Association basically took a vote under this pressure and said, okay, we'll take homosexuality out. It's no longer an illness. That was kind of a blip. That was a mistake. But when that happens, you obviously still have transgender people still being categorized as ill. And so by kind of removing homosexuality, you also simultaneously almost kind of solidify the idea that, okay, but this being trans is a kind of objective disorder or illness.
It's like a limited hangout almost on some level.
Exactly. And so I think I try to be critical of kind of these arguments that you see a lot of kind of when you look at like archival material from the time, is people being like, we're not mad, we're not sick, we're normal, like we should be assimilated into society. And I think that when we look at these arguments, we should think, well, kind of who are you throwing under the bus when you do that? And I think that, like you say, like the ongoing pathologization of trans people, I think in some ways is a bit of a legacy of the way that kind of that move was enacted. And yeah, the fact that like most trans people I know in the UK have to get a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, usually by a psychiatrist, if you want to access gender affirming healthcare. So yeah, that's a form of pathologization that still continues.
I want to get back, and I think this intersects a little bit with what you were just talking to, but to that point where you said like there at various times the diagnoses of being mad in whatever form it is sort of like shifted from social to biological and back and forth, like what influenced the ebb and flow of that? Right? Like, I mean, you mentioned drapetomania. There was also like a protest psychosis during that era that you were just talking about, the civil rights era, like which I guess presumably is like you're caught up in the mania of protest, and you've gone mad with protest fever. But how did that track the needs of either the entire system in terms of capitalism, or was it also sort of like tied to, so-called innovation? Like things became a lot more biological when Pfizer stumbled on, X, Y, or Z drug, and then all of a sudden everything downstream from there became biological, and so it sold a lot of drugs. Like how does that track?
I think it's a really good question, and it's really complicated, actually. It's something that I feel like I didn't craft a very clear, okay, this is it, this is the answer when you look at the history, because you do see a lot of kind of infighting within mental health professionals, and you see it dating all the way back to the 18th century, people being like, okay, no, what we, it's the four humors, it's about bile and phlegm and things like this, and that led to a lot of kind of really brutal treatments. And then you kind of see that approach failing. And as that approach fails, you see this kind of alternative movement spring up, which, these professionals were arguing, actually, this is a kinder approach, this moral treatment that I described of, we just need to get people into work. This is the kinder way to do things. And then I think, you're right to kind of tie it to kind of currents more broadly in science and kind of broader society. Obviously, towards the end of the 19th century, you get the eugenics movement. That was very much seen as a way of kind of proving things as legitimate objective truth and objective science and about kind of advancement of the human race, etc. And around that time, you get, psychiatrists who were very much trying to prove that psychiatry was a legitimate science like any other. And so then you get this big push towards, treatments like electroconvulsive therapy, really invasive medications and things like this. And, lobotomies, people saying it's about the brain. But I also think you can look at other trends and historical currents. For example, during the Second World War, lots of people, asylum residents, were also killed during the Holocaust under the Nazis' Action T4 program. I think it's somewhere between 70 and 100% of people diagnosed with schizophrenia in Germany were killed or sterilized. And so after the Second World War, there was also a bit more of a turn towards, psychoanalysis, Freud, these more social approaches. But I do think kind of the biological turn that we've had towards the end of the 20th century is very associated with neoliberalism. But I wouldn't say that biological approaches are the only ones that are possible under neoliberalism, because we see now kind of this idea, everyone should be going to therapy. Everyone needs to be doing their mindfulness. It's your individual responsibility to go to yoga or do journaling or self-care or whatever it is. So I think it's kind of this push and pull throughout history, but you see both approaches getting weaponized under neoliberal capitalism.
Well, I really wanted to ask you about that because right now, I mean, we've talked about this on this program, the ubiquity of mental health awareness. I mean, I feel like we've reached peak awareness about the term mental health, right? But awareness is wildly insufficient without care, and particularly in the United States, where we do not have any socialized healthcare for the general population. That is a major problem. It is about access and affordability as opposed to awareness. And so I'm curious what your take is on like the overall PSA campaign that's both been undergone by politicians and like corporate entities like the NFL, for example.
Okay, yeah. I think, like you say, we are at peak awareness. We're all very aware. And I think this is something that we should really question, this idea. Firstly, awareness, when we talk about it, so often, who does the responsibility fall on to make everyone aware? We often see these ideas like we all need to speak out and break the stigma, which is actually placing responsibility on the very people who are suffering to speak out. And I think also like speaking out, we don't all have equal access to doing that. We often see, right, like the praising of, say, celebrities or people who, open up about their struggles. But, in the book I take, for example, if you're a single mother and you open up about, your schizophrenia diagnosis, you might have your children taken away. You might be institutionalized. Like, we don't all have equal access to this. And I think it's kind of messed up to imply that, if we all just speak out, that's kind of going to solve this widespread mental health crisis that we're seeing. But I think also when we talk about awareness, we very rarely question kind of the insidious suggestion, like aware of what? Like, I think when we talk about everyone should be aware of this thing or that thing, we don't necessarily question the knowledge that's being circulated as objective truth. And this knowledge is often, the idea that it's individual illness or, you've just got a chemical imbalance and things like this, which is not always going to lead to a very social or political robust understanding of where suffering often actually comes from. And so I try to kind of really critique this idea of awareness and actually say, well, it is possible, I've learned a lot from these like kind of awareness conversations. I don't think that they're straightforwardly negative, but I think that acting as if that's the be all and end all, I don't think is going to lead us towards actual political change. And I don't think it leads us towards liberation.
Is there a tension in that we address these problems all exclusively as a psychological problem, right? I mean, as opposed to there's a whole cohort of people who are responding in a similar fashion to the context in which they're in. Maybe the problem is the context. Mm-hmm. I mean, someone once like accused me of like of trying to. There's some I think it's a Buddhist saying about protecting your feet by putting leather all around the planet versus putting some leather on your shoes. But the problem with something like that is, what if everybody's having to put leather on their shoes and we can actually control just how sharp the ground is. I mean, the ground is being made sharp because it behooves a certain class of people to have it be sharp because maybe they're selling shoes. And so I guess the point being, like, how problematic is that? There's been this sort of, like, this battle between maybe sociology and psychology.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really problematic. I think, like you say, there's this idea that, you're the problem. You need to change something about yourself. This could be through biological means, through like things like meds, but it also can be through social means, things like therapy and mindfulness that I mentioned. And while many of these things, like, they can be healing for us, they can be good for us. Like, I think it would be dishonest to kind of pretend that these things can't be paths to healing. The exclusive focus on these individual remedies so often completely obscures the political causes of mass distress. Like, I would say, like, the majority of distress, and also, a large amount of physical illness as well. I think you can extend the arguments to physical illness. You can ask, why are so many people getting in London getting asthma in kind of, the crowded city conditions that we live in? Why do so many people, are they developing heart disease? Things like this, which again are very political as well, like they're tied to the political world. And, the cultural theorist Mark Fisher talks about this thing. He describes, you got privatization under neoliberalism, but he has this concept called the privatization of stress, where he says, actually, under neoliberal capitalism, we have individualized this idea of, it's stress, it's individual, it's not kind of a social political problem. And there's some really interesting research by the journalist Tim Adams, where in the UK, he looks at the number of strike days, which reached kind of their peak in the 1970s and then kind of became decimated under Margaret Thatcher. And he says, as the number of strike days decrease, you see an increase in the number of what are called stress-related sick days. And so you can see right there this kind of shift from a more political and bigger structural analysis to an individual one, which is solely focused on, this idea that you're the problem and you need to change something about yourself. And as we've mentioned, usually that is realigning yourself, your body or your mind, back in line with the demands of the market.
How much, I mean, as I sort of wonder this, I sort of trying to compare it to the idea of, like, well, if our healthcare system is dealing with asthma and it's increasing, then it starts to move into, like, sort of a public policy question. Same with obesity in this country. Like, what are the public policy things that are creating this, and do we have a public policy answer? Is there a certain amount of I guess, non-aggregating or non-medical support for mental, well-being, because we don't want to necessarily know that, wait a second, this seems like an awful coincidence that there's so many people suffering from this type of stress that we can actually sort of, like, see the numbers, and we can see it creeping up, like that maybe there is a public policy response to this rather than necessarily an individual treatment to everybody or in conjunction with.
Definitely. Like, I think the causes of much of our suffering in society link back to kind of the same things that we always talk about: poverty, inequality. And I think that injecting money into communities, for example, or things like a universal basic income, so that people don't feel that they have to either go to work or fall into poverty and potentially become houseless and die. Better working conditions, better labor laws, the ability for people to unionize and improve their conditions of work, which is where most of us spend most of our time. I think these are the things that, I think when we talk about mental distress, we often say, oh, like, what are the other options? Like, how could we have better forms of treatment or healthcare? But for me, healthcare begins at prevention. It begins kind of in our homes, in the streets, in our communities. Like, I think that if we had kind of healthier worlds, or a world that didn't lead so many people to ill health and suffering. People, like a large number of people that currently engage with, for example, the mental health system, might not even get to the point of needing to get to those systems. And I also think things like, the decimation of community under neoliberalism. So many of us are so atomized. We're living in such individual conditions, working in precarious gig economy jobs, things like this. I feel like in many ways it kind of feels almost like too straightforward to kind of say, that suffering, the conditions we live in right now, they cause us to suffer. And I think whether we choose to kind of categorize that as an issue of mental health or just an issue of creating livable lives for people, I think these are the things that we need to be looking towards, kind of prevention and community.
I would love to see, like some type of statistical analysis of, healthcare being a commodity in this country versus in your country, although my understanding is that that's like not going in the right direction. But how much that in and of itself, never mind in terms of like on the care side, but on just the notion of like, I'm worried my kid's going to get sick because I don't have proper health insurance. I don't have access to medical care. How much of a what percentage of just sort of like average stress is a function of just the worrying about something that's been commodified that is a question of mere existence in our society.
Or living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, like when,
on top of all of those questions. Well, before I do want to get to that era of Reagan and Thatcher, because that to me seems like the biggest shift, one of the biggest shifts, at least in modern times, as to how we deal with this. And in this country, it is creating it is still sort of like created a ripple of social of problems in many respects that were never resolved. Again, it was the 1-2 proposal. We're going to empty out essentially mental hospitals, and we're going to provide resources within the community that are going to help folks. And the second part of that never materialized.
Yeah, I really like how you describe that as kind of, like part one happened and part two didn't. So that's how I talk about it in the book as well, as kind of a partial revolution. And it's something that many patients were arguing for themselves. There was in the UK and in the US, a big kind of mental health service user or they often call themselves psychiatric survivor movements, which were arguing against institutionalization, against forced treatment, kind of against these huge warehouses where people often spent the majority of their lives. But at the same time, you also do see people saying that when these institutions closed, lots of people were basically ejected from brutal institutions into a brutal social and economic climate. So you see lots more people who were categorized as mentally ill becoming houseless or entering the prison system, another system that basically separates and warehouses people who are seen to not be behaving in ways that are useful to capital accumulation. And so, I think when we look back at deinstitutionalization, we can see that in many ways, it was a positive thing. But at the same time, it's not, the revolution doesn't start and end at the institution. We can't only revolutionize institutions or close institutions. We also need to revolutionize the conditions that produce these institutions in the first place. And so I do think that does mean taking on capitalism and creating worlds where people can genuinely have community care. In the UK, Margaret Thatcher called kind of the policy when she closed institutions, she called it care in the community, which is so insidious because it sounds really nice, but actually that community care didn't really materialize for people. And so I think that kind of, that bigger project surrounding institutions, creating a better world is something much larger that we need to take on.
I mean, you have the final part of your book discusses sort of like other options, and I think sort of some of them are implicit in everything that you've been talking about in terms of like making the world more livable in many respects, and reducing stress by making the world more livable. I mean, it's pretty straightforward in that regard. But what are other some of the sort of the standouts for you? I know you mentioned a program in northern Italy, and there's something called the crypt theory, I guess. Tell us about ones that stand out for you in terms of like, aside from sort of like broad addressing of people's needs, that maybe more short-term, more specific.
Yeah, I'll choose a few specific standouts. So I look at, like you mentioned, a town called Trieste, which is in the northeast of Italy, where during kind of deinstitutionalization, where it was happening across a lot of Europe and in the US as well, a psychiatrist and also anti-psychiatrist called Franco Basaglia basically pioneered this movement to close the institutions, the asylums in Italy. And there was a system established in Trieste, which had what they call a no locked doors policy, which meant that no one was locked inside. But crucially, it also meant that no one was shut out from accessing mental health care either. So this was kind of a big way in Trieste of addressing, the issue of so many people having mental health crises and being institutionalized was actually, well, what if we didn't have waiting lists? What if you didn't have to go via a doctor to access mental health care? You could just walk into a center in your local community at any hour of the day. And so they have this very consensual approach. And they also have an approach that doesn't have this hard line between the community and between the institution. So, for example, in the UK, and I think it's the same in the US, when you're institutionalized, if you're having a mental health crisis, you're completely shut off from your family. You might not be able to have visitors. You might have to give up your possessions. There are contraband items and things like this. But in Trieste, if you want to bring your pet or you want to bring a family member or something to stay overnight, that's completely allowed. And you find that actually when more kind of consensual and community integrated approaches like this exist, people are actually more likely to engage honestly with mental health systems. There are many people who say, well, I feel like I can't talk to my therapist about like my thoughts of harming myself or harming others because I'm scared that I'm going to be institutionalized in a psychiatric ward if I talk about this, because in the UK I think that's part of the law. And so you see this much kinder system where people are more willing to engage, and also fewer people do kind of enter a really severe mental health crisis in the first place. But I also look at a few other kind of what are called peer support approaches. For example, something called the Hearing Voices Network, which is a global network that tries to take a really depathological approach to experiences that often are diagnosed as psychosis. So, often if you engage with traditional mental health systems and you say, I'm hearing voices, the treatments that you get are going to be very focused on how can we get rid of the symptom? Again, this thing of get you back into work, just reintegrate you into the societal norm. And how do we just shut it down? Whereas the Hearing Voices Network takes this approach of, okay, well, if you're hearing voices, like maybe we should ask the question, what are they saying to you? A lot of people become distressed because their voices are telling them really disturbing things or telling them to harm themselves. So actually maybe engaging with the content or even speaking back to them might be another way through. Or there are other people who say, through the Hearing Voices Network, I've learned to accept my voices. I've realized I'm never going to be able to get rid of them, or these medications don't work for me, or they give me bad side effects. And I've learned to actually live with them. Or some people say they even enjoy them. They feel like they always have company. And so I think these kind of depathological approaches are really pioneering, and they center kind of people's relationships to their mental health. It's not all about just getting you back into work. And I also look at something called Mad Pride, which took place in the US and also takes place in the UK, which is a movement a bit like Gay Pride, where people come together and they actually celebrate and say, I'm not ashamed of being mad. I'm proud of my madness, and it's something that I want to embrace as a part of my identity. And so I think that also presents another kind of liberating possibility. And you've also got things in the UK like crisis houses as well, which are kind of residential, a bit similar to Trieste, residential spaces where you can go and stay overnight, but no one's going to forcibly treat you or force you to stay there, or confiscate your items and things like this. And so, yeah, these are a few examples of kind of kinder approaches that also are centered on the individual. They're not these blanket kind of, this is the medication, or we'll put you all in the same place kind of thing. They're very focused on what's right for you. You know, what do you need to heal?
And it seems like, at least the Trieste one, but the others to some extent mirror your discussion of diagnoses. That it is, the diagnoses are very polarizing. It's completely binary, as opposed to maybe some notion of like there's an ebb and flow, and we do these binary diagnoses, and it really is a function of like how well do you function at work. I mean, for the most part, right? And within social circles as well, but ultimately it all sort of leads back to, are you leading a productive life? And the question ultimately becomes, productive for whom, and under what terms?
Just real on that point, though. I mean, I think that's really important to think about in relation to how the homelessness crisis is dealt with in this country in particular. Like right now, Eric Adams's policy is essentially that police in New York City can take anybody off the street that they perceive as experiencing as a mental health episode and put them in the ER, having our already threadbare healthcare system bear the brunt of it. And the purest form of the stigmatization as a result of capitalism that you describe is in our treatment of the unhoused. I'm not sure how that applies in the UK, but for here, I think that's just important to point out.
Absolutely. Yeah. What's a clearer example of, talking about institutionalization as a means of warehousing people who are seen not to be exploitable, than that Eric Adams policy? And also, I think it touches on a number of things, like what's the best way to address the mental distress of people who are houseless? It's giving them housing. It's a clear example of how a political policy could actually mean that people don't, we argue that they need to be given these treatments or taken, to places where it will retrospectively be remedied. But actually, we could prevent their distress in the first place. And it also raises questions of who's vulnerable to pathologization. If you're houseless and you're in distress, you don't have somewhere to go inside and actually to heal on your own, or to be looked after by a family or a family member or a friend. And I think that's something we see a lot with the Mental Health Act in the UK, which is the legislation that surrounds institutionalization, which is that if you're having a crisis or you're seen to be a person who's mentally ill or mad in public, you're very vulnerable to the police taking you off the streets and incarcerating you.
Yeah, who's privileged enough to be able to have the grace of getting care as opposed to being involuntarily institutionalized is something to keep in mind. So
exactly, and it also raises that question again of what is the definition of sanity? Like, how is a houseless person expected not to be depressed or to be anxious about where they're going to sleep at night? Like, I think that to look at these things as individual illness or individual distress really doesn't get to the heart of where suffering comes from.
Micha Frazer-Carroll, columnist at The Independent, author of Mad World, The Politics of Mental Health. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Really interesting.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
We'll put a link to that book at majority.fm. Folks, just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you not only get the half free of commercials, but you get the fun half, and you can use things like the app at majorityapp.com. It's available to everybody, but you can use it when you're a member to I Am the Show, for instance. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And other things also. AM Quickie, amquickie.com. Get the news in your email box 3 days a week for free, 5 days a week for paid subscribers. But 3 days a week is a great deal anyways. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. And in the coming days and weeks, I'm going to get a special for Jazz Daredevil whiskey highballs.
Ooh.
Yeah. I worked out a special deal.
Wow.
Special deal. I've been in high consultations with...
Was it a tough negotiation?
The Jazz Daredevil himself. Yeah, I hit his helmet.
I mean...
That's what I did.
Seems only right.
Emma! It's happening on ESVN.
We'll talk about the U.S. women's national team loss, the right-wing freak out today. I also want to review the Netflix quarterback series because it's pretty incredible. And breaking news, a minority owner of the Texans has been charged with rape. So we will be talking about that and NFL rookies to watch. YouTube.com/ESPN show today at 4 p.m.
Matt, Left Reckoning.
This weekend for Left Reckoning patrons, Dave and I talked about the scandal with regards to Texas A&M sort of weakening a offer of a job to a professor from University of Texas because it turned out she was a black woman who had written for the New York Times and was very into DEI, supposedly. And the texts from the Board of Regents members who were upset with it have leaked, and it's very interesting to look at the makeup of the type of guys. Because if I asked ChatGPT to make up 3 bios for conservative Regents members, it would be a car salesman, a petroleum industry guy, and a Deloitte consultant. And these are the 3 guys who are texting saying, "Hey, I thought we wanted to start a journalism program to get conservative, to plant conservatives in the discourse."
We're planning to talk about this tomorrow as well.
Oh, good.
And also, there was another story, sort of like a current one that of
another A&M professor,
who was fired presumably because she was critical of the lieutenant governor. Now, you've probably heard this from all of the people who are really concerned about free speech.
Oh, Barry Weiss is all over this.
It's one thing to defend moderation on platforms about Nazism and fake medical information, essentially. But it's another
criticize local government
and you get fired. I mean, that's
because literally one of, I don't know if it was Patrick or Abbott or which one of those guys, but one of their like a relative or like a friend of the family.
No, it was Dan Patrick.
Dan Patrick, right? Yeah, was in attendance and said, "Hey, this person said you weren't handling the opioid crisis very well," which a surprise, they're not.
And it was a professor who covers addiction, or whose specialty is addiction.
Yeah, woke you mean.
Let's get a little political when she's making assessments of policy.
I mean, don't go there.
Snowflakes.
Sounds like wokeness.
Folks, 646-257-3920 is the phone number. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Oh, no. Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Can we bring back DJ Denner?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter.
Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100.
Can't knock the hustle.
Come on, fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the fun half. Heavy breathing Steven. Hey, Sam, you always let Emma and Matt talk about their podcasts. I'm just wondering why you never plug your podcast. Are you ashamed of it?
You should plug your podcast on your podcast.
Seb Gorka's back pain. Thanks for the great interview today. I have struggled with depression for years, and for the past week, I've been debating checking myself into my local behavioral health ward due to feeling like a complete failure and other such thoughts. However, I don't know if I can properly explain it to my boss or get work shifts covered. This interview, all of you guys, make me feel like I'm less alone. It's a big problem, and there shouldn't be that kind of stigma attached to it. And my heart goes out to you, and good luck. I don't know if I have much advice.
Yeah. There's so much that capitalism gets us to internalize that's like wrongful shame or needless shame, like including about our financial situation, seeking help for healthcare and things like that. It's really hard you can even acknowledge those things as dynamics. And then when it comes to yourself personally, it's easy to be hard on yourself, but we're here for you.
Her story gels a lot with the data you see, particularly with students. And like the longer you go to higher education, particularly in this country, I know like you're depressed. And I can't help but feel like part of that is the amount of debt people take on. You look at like the White House, I think it was, said, or maybe it was the Department of Education said, if you feel suicidal, here's a number. And it's like, there's a certain number of people who are going to feel suicidal in that kind of debt. Like, that's just what debt does. This has been studied to death. And to act like there's some sort of just reach out. No, we need to actually do policy that's not, to use Sam's metaphor, making the ground harder on people.
Mm-hmm.
Bryce from Arizona, I can tell you right now, I will not read all of this. It is just too long. We only have another hour and 15 minutes to the show. I will read the first couple of sentences. Hello, Sam and crew. You may be tired of this topic. Based upon the length of the comment, I'm going to bet that we are, but go ahead. But I believe after the appearance of Ryan Grimm on the show to discuss the COVID-19 lab leak hypothesis, there is a very real need for you to have someone on the show who can represent the scientific evidence that essentially rules out the possibility of a lab origin. Now, Here's the problem with doing that. Like, we corrected some of the things that Ryan said that were, clearly unestablished. There is competing theories about, whether there were people who came from that military games that got that had COVID. A lot of them, when they got back to their countries, felt that they had COVID. There is no, as far as I know, epidemiological evidence that they had COVID. Wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to find, after the fact, but there is no evidence. But as far as I know, in all the scientists I've read, okay, because you say, I believe the MR is one of the most reasonable and grounded news shows, and I hope you'll fulfill this duty to your audience properly, represent the more supported theory. There is no evidence that essentially, as you say, rules out the possibility of a lab origin. Right? There's no conclusion.
Well, there's a difference between lab origin and lab leak, right? Those are two different things. Lab origin are they implying like it was created in some kind of lab, or lab leak? Like...
No, I think that it came from a lab.
Right.
I mean, the language is, imprecise in this instance. But as far as I know, people say there is a possibility it could have been leaked from a lab, but the probability, there is a high probability that it was the thing with the zoo, like not actually from a zoo, but I can't pronounce that name. Zoonotics, yes. And so even as you ask me to set the record straight, as far as I have been, read, and the thing is that I don't know that we do a value about it either way at this juncture. I mean, we were very clear on the show with Ryan Grimm that there was the preponderance of the evidence says it's zoonotic, that there is no actual evidence of it being a lab leak. There's circumstantial evidence, but no non-circumstantial evidence. Mm-hmm. I think everyone, as far as I can tell, agrees that there's no way to know 100% sure, but that the preponderance of the evidence is that it's zoonotic. I don't know, keep relitigating it is not going to add to that. I'm happy to, when it comes up and someone says there's lab leak theory, unless there's new evidence, say, this is what like the state of the science is right now. High probability that it was zoonotic. A remaining possibility that it was, it came out of a lab, but unlikely based upon the evidence. I mean, there's really no other. I don't think we're ever going to get past that. Maybe that we will, but if we are, we'll talk about it. But I don't know that relitigating it really does anything, because
there's not very likely to be anything conclusive.
Well, that's the point is that like, but at the same time, I am for yes. We should have more scrutiny on both. Like, we should have more people in the field looking for pandemics. We should have
more cooperation with China.
More cooperation with China on it. We should be very vigilant about these any labs that are looking at this stuff. I think like the Obama administration sort of like skepticism regarding things like gain of function and just sort of like we should have very high standards applied to this. My opinion has been basically the same throughout all that. I do not think that we should ever be in a situation where we don't have viruses studied in labs. And so, I'm not sure beyond all of those things where the value is in doing that, at least not now. Yeah, and I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, we take guest recommendations, and if you see somebody put out some kind of, encompassing work on it in the coming months, give us a ring.
Golden Oyster Cult. May I get a shofar from me and my wife's dogs, Rory, who passed last week and made our lives wonderful and was truly one of a kind. You can. I've had a good friend lose a dog recently, and it's very, very difficult. Fuxatani Phil, regarding today's interview, the other thing wrong with the lack of care in U.S. is how easy it is to find substances to self-medicate. My mental health got better when I quit alcohol, but I've been trying for about a year to find some professional help, and it's ridiculous. Indeed. Fiduciary. Ice cream so good. Gang, gang.
Oh.
Is there something going on with that? Because I've seen a couple of ice cream references.
There's a TikTok thing where you basically, these creators will be streaming live and people can say like send like an ice cream emoji that costs $2 and the creator will do a sort of canned response. Ice cream so good, gang, gang. Thanks for...
I don't understand.
Thanks for donating. We should, get into that. We can make a lot of money.
Ice cream, gang, gang.
Oh, wait. So wait, but they send us money?
That's what it is. Like, it's when they send us money, like a little ice cream emoji with a donation.
I mean, I'll say ice cream, gang, gang all day if you send me money.
It's sort of like a TikTok version of like receiving a super chat and then doing an action relative to that super
But
chat.
I'm not seeing any super chats right now, so let's not give it
Dance
away for free,
monkey.
guys.
Yeah, that's what's going on here. Jack from Jersey, nice haircut, looking sharp. Thank you, Jack. You're the first person to notice. No one even in my family noticed.
I did notice it, but I complimented your shirt when I came in, and I figured that 2 compliments would just be too much for the day.
Okay.
I should have said. I should have said.
Nobody
something
said anything.
earlier.
It's all right. It's
I
not a big deal.
apologize.
It's not a big deal.
It's my bad.
It's fine.
Yeah.
I don't feel bad about it. All right. Well, let's do this. Let's start this off fun, right? Because Friday, wasn't our fun half wasn't fun. I don't think. If I remember correctly, it was not fun.
Yeah, like we were talking about, like Hakeem Jeffries saying Jerusalem is the sixth borough
right,
of
yeah.
New York.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I did Debbie Downer.
I do want to say also, Ben Gvir praising the killing of Palestinians by. I bring this up because we've gotten into conversations, and you hear a lot of right-wing talking points.
Or Democratic primary.
Candidates say, talk about the idea of pay for slay programs that the Palestinian Authority has, where it will take care of your family if you are engaged in a fight with Israelis. I don't know that you necessarily have to kill someone, but they want attacks and this and that, obviously.
Against, the occupiers.
Yeah, obviously, we're not promoting that type of thing. But the idea that there's some type of moral high ground. All of those soldiers, incidentally, who shoot at Palestinians, kill Palestinians, bulldoze their homes of Palestinians, harass Palestinians, occupy Palestinians. I got some news for you. They get paid.
Benefits, baby.
They get paid and they get benefits. Now you have a government official praising this. I mean, you could say that there's sort of some moral inequivalency. I mean, but you'd have a tough time arguing that, at least if you just looked at without the context of the actions. It gets a lot harder to argue that when you remind yourself that, well, one side is actually occupied by the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like when people talk about
so much for the fun half.
What about killing cops, in response to police violence, or I don't know. This would be the same, something very similar as if Native Americans responded with violence when their homes were being taken away from them, and then
exactly,
it's who are the real savages here?
It's the way that it's not a particular to Israel. The way that we teach the removal of the Dakota from Minnesota, and you look at their territory that they were supposed to be given along the Minnesota River, and how that shrinks over time because settlers, here's a new Ulm, a new German settlement in this part, and ultimately it's bad that there was violence in response to that occupation there, but you have to look at the broader context. But even now, the way we teach that is there was violence on all sides, and isn't it good that it's over now?
Let's play this Crowder thing, because I started by saying we're going to have a fun half, and then went into about how Israel is
Stephen
turning into a fascist state.
Acknowledged our existence.
Okay, yeah. Now this is weird. Now, Stephen Crowder's been having some trouble lately. I don't know if people are aware of this. He got into a fight with what is it called? The Right Stuff. What is the name of that?
The Daily Wire.
The Daily Wire.
No, the Right Stuff is the dating app.
Right. Sorry.
Right.
And the Daily Wire. The Daily Wire about not getting paid $100 million for services or something.
50 mil.
What, 50, 25? I'm sorry. I'm one of those people. It's like, if it's over, if you start saying millions, like, it's all the same to me.
Yeah. Well, you got to back up to the origin of all of this.
Well,
which was your confrontation with him.
Simultaneously, Steven Crowder's wife left him because he, at least from the video she released, appears to be sort of an abusive, like mentally, emotionally abusive guy.
Controlling guy.
Now, to be fair, although maybe this is being too fair, he was under a lot of stress at that time that he was emotionally abusive. We only saw a video from the fall of like 2 years ago, right? 2021. Yep. And he was under a lot of stress at that time. Now, it sounds like from his wife's ex-wife's account that he was abusive throughout the marriage in this way. This just happened to be when she was expecting twins. And then, of course, if you know anything about this show and our relationship with Steven Crowder, her expectation of twins was the first excuse that he used that nobody knew about. Mm-hmm. When he backed out of a debate with Ethan Klein because he thought, and this was a crazy thing to think at the time, that somehow Ethan Klein was going to bring us on and he would have to debate me on the topic of his choice. I remember hearing Ethan said that to us, and I'm like, that's crazy.
There's no way.
I can't imagine A, that he's that paranoid, or B, that he would be that scared. Like, what? It's not like, I'm not magic. They just had a very perfectly polite debate with, the Sean the crime guy and, Stitch and Fine, or
Lilo and Stitch.
Adam and Stitch. Yeah. And, perfectly fine debates. They had some points. I had some points. And, it was all fine. I don't know what Crowder's so worried about.
Everyone's still breathing.
We debated Charlie Kirk. And I even had a debate, I guess, with Tim Pool one time. He seems to have pulled it down. I don't think he liked how that came out. But nevertheless. And so Crowder, people know about that. And so Crowder's life sort of fell apart at that point. He decided
he took some elective surgery.
Well, I mean, it sounded like he really needed that surgery. He could just decide when it was. He decided to have it when, to compete with his wife having the children. I mean, different people work in different ways.
I know you need me here for the last, months of your pregnancy, but I got to look better.
I mean, honestly, women get a lot of attention when they're about to give birth. It's a little
I can tell you, and it's also, the kids are going to get the attention, and, he was complaining about her wifely duties, and maybe he was just concerned that he would not be the big baby in the family, and the other two actual babies would be the babies. But nevertheless, so here he is. He's a divorced guy. His business sort of propositions fell apart a little bit. He walked away from $25 million. He needs the cash. And now he's rebranding. And then weirdly, he's using us to rebrand. Now, I'm all in favor of that. But I mean, come on, if you're going to actually acknowledge that we exist, why not actually engage? It's very strange.
There's this right-wing blowhard named Steven Crowder.
Steven Crowder, despicable guy.
Steven Crowder, who shall be referred to as Steven Cowder.
Not only is he extremely misogynistic and sexist, he's also homophobic.
He's a disgusting garbage human being. Has been his brand from the very beginning.
Just go look at the titles of that guy's videos. Like, he's like the king of like saying horrible, offensive.
There's something going on with Crowder.
I fully believe this is a man that is on such a spiral. It is just shocking to me that any person cannot
posit one thing, okay, I get all this. In fact, like I think we did we were planning to do like an ad like this, but what's weird is like when they cut to him, honestly, it's like, dude, why do you like? Didn't you have a shot selection? Like, what is it that you're going for? It looks like, honestly, he's been sunburned, like he's got like a windburned face.
I don't
Like,
know.
he's-
Well,
he looks like he's,
everybody's
like-
on fire, right? I
like
mean,
he's-
it's like a
But everybody
stuff is
else
burning down.
Everybody else in the thing, like I mean, look, it's pretty clear the guy is got some like vanity issues. He's a little bit concerned about how he comes off. Wears a gun and he's wearing his t-shirts, obviously, and it doesn't seem like in any way like they're trying to make him to be this sort of brave guy, and it's weird the images that they use of him.
It's weird to include that he's on a spiral. As if what's like the good interpret? I'm not on a spiral. Actually, it might look like I'm on a spiral, but actually, this is all going according to my plan.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
weird.
he doesn't show your face either, but I mean, who knows? That could not have been intentional. It just shows the logo of the show. I don't know.
I think that's great, actually. I think that is. I mean,
It was from our 2023 clips too, if you look on the side. So it's recent poll.
So fairly recent. But I just gotta say, like, is he gonna address? Because he tried to pivot after the Daily Wire thing, which he's playing the Candace Owens thing.
Big
part.
con. Whatever
Big
happened to
con,
that?
Yeah,
Oh,
that
right.
kind of dissipated. And then subsequently, there were multiple articles, one in Mediaite and then one in the New York Post about workplace misconduct.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
where
ignoring that.
most recently there was an article that came out about him, which showed that he had been, according to multiple staffers who spoke to Mediaite, sending photos of his genitalia to staffers who, happened to be male. I think that's, interesting to note given his homophobia and his propensity to dress up.
Let me just say, like, in defense of that, it was a workplace strategy that at different times that we had talked about. Our committees, like our HR committee, was like, "Is this something we should be doing?"
Implementing the dick pic strategy.
It just so happened we decided not to.
Yeah,
that
no
it's
one.
not,
We didn't
but-
go as far as he did with which the actual alleged putting of the genitalia on your employees, like both physically and through photos over text. But yeah, I mean, maybe he'll address that. Maybe this is what he's like ramping up for. I don't know.
Big tech is in bed with big con.
All right, good. I thought that was part of the video.
Horrible, offensive.
There's something going on with Crowder.
I fully believe this is a man that is on such a spiral. It is just shocking to me that any person cannot see exactly what he is right now.
And remember, I have not offered a word on any of it.
Pause it for a second. Okay, first off, no, I literally remember you're responding to all of this.
Don't blame my kids.
Much of it. And
yeah.
Where's Matt Walsh? Why did they just use Candace Owens in attacking her? I wonder why.
Did he use the boring video
It's
either?
weird. It's weird. It's sort of weird. It's weird that they didn't use Matt Walsh, but they used Candace Owens. I don't know. Maybe she had more succinct, but he specifically did have a lot of words on all of it. Like, I do remember him addressing Candace Owens and all of that.
But not the harassment. So maybe that's what he's going to do. Maybe he's going to talk about his propensity to show his penis in the workplace.
Oh,
they've also talked about that and said it's a big funny joke, and everyone.
Not the dick pic part yet.
Oh,
I mean,
sure,
it's
yeah.
hard
Are you
to
sure?
keep track of the waves. This one's really pretty. I'm not sure.
I mean, the last
I'm
one
not
was
sure.
bad too, and they just made a joke about it and said,
I sort of feel like he's responded to all of it. But
Yeah.
let's pretend that he didn't. Go.
Okay.
Any person cannot see exactly what he is right now.
And remember, I have not offered a word on any of it.
Taking some notes.
You want something to change? It starts with love. It starts with love for the truth.
Oh, a love for the truth. Okay.
But love without truth is meaningless. A love based on a lie is just that.
Pause it for a second. I mean, that is, this is what is known in the business as a double entendre. I'm going to talk about what I'm talking about my journalistic show, but really this is a way for me to send a message to my ex-wife that she was really, a liar. She pretended to me that she would be wifely, and of course she was not wifely. That it's just my speculation is what's going on there. Similarly situated. I have a show. I'm also divorced. To be fair, my wife did not release any video of me saying that she wasn't wifely. In fact, I don't think I ever used that word. I don't even know that I knew that people were still using that
Yes,
word.
and please, pregnant wife, very, very pregnant with 2 children, walk the dogs and then feed them their medication that you fear might be toxic.
Watch
Do it
it.
now. Do it now. Yeah.
I didn't control
You
her
didn't do that?
with one car. No, I.
Okay.
To be fair, I did not do any of that stuff. But nevertheless,
It starts with love for the truth. But love without truth is meaningless. A love based on a lie is just that. It's a lie.
See, all the attacks of the media against Stephen is because they're scared.
We are in ideological war, and we are at a potential tipping point in this country. You need different kinds of people. You need different battalions.
Different kinds of people, different. I mean, it's all pictures of different white guys working in his working crew for him. It's weird.
And Alex Jones?
And Alex Jones, but to be fair, on the Crowder set, filling in for him.
Yeah, I love to be obsessed with truth and then invite Carrie Lake on my show regularly.
Or, who I just mentioned, Alex Jones, who I don't know, he was just proven in the court of law for a pretty big figure to be
one of the
defamatory.
biggest, I think completely objectively, I mean, if you love the truth, I don't know that anyone's ever paid a bigger fee for lying in public than Alex Jones. I mean, I'm willing to be stand corrected, but I don't believe there's ever been a bigger dollar award for lying in the history of the country than Alex Jones.
There's no love without truth.
There you go.
Because they're scared.
We are in ideological war, and we are at a potential tipping point in this country. You need different kinds of people. You need different battalions.
The replatforming.
It is time to
begins.
Intensity.
Wait a second. Go. This is getting the tension's building. There's fire, the replatform, and then they have a picture of Nick DiPaolo.
Mm-hmm.
I've known Nick for 25 years, and I'll tell you something. Like, if you want to roll out something that is exciting and new and bold and brave, Nick DiPaolo, I don't even know he's so far down the list that I don't even think that there's you could eliminate the letters in his name out of the alphabet and still be okay for a year. Like the idea that Nick DiPaolo is the fresh new voice that he's bringing in. I've told this story before, but I cast Nick DiPaolo in a pilot I did called Beat Cops in 1997 or 8. And I have a very bad memory in general. Like, I just don't remember things at all that they ever took place. But one of the things I remember in my life is something from there, like 30 years ago, where I was talking to Nick and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, he was going back and forth. I was going back and forth to LA and New York. He's like, I said, are you still living in LA? And he's like, no, you kidding? You can't get a job out there if you're a white guy.
Mm.
I don't think in television there's ever been an era in which white guys were literally getting handed just huge checks for being mildly funny and white. That was basically how I made all my money. Was just being in LA, being mildly funny and white.
And I mean, was there not a cottage industry for Italian guys to be cast as cops or mobsters or wise guys?
I got news for you. I did multiple. I did about in my heyday, I think I was a lead on 10 network sitcoms. At least on 3 or 4 of those, there was a guy just like Nick DiPaolo who was my buddy.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh boy, that is amazing. That it was just shocking. He may have been talking about how I think it was Paramount, UPN was doing a slate of shows for black programming. But to be clear, 2 years earlier, there was only 3 networks. And then there was ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, UPN, WB, all just throwing out massive contracts to anybody who did had a decent 10-minute stand-up reel. But ladies and gentlemen, I give you Nick DiPaolo. Okay, here we go. You got 40 seconds of Nick DiPaolo? Yeah, put up.
Okay, yeah, Bradley, pull up
just
this,
to show.
So yeah, this
how
is
exciting this is the thing. There's a lot of subtext to this Crowder announcement that people are missing, and I want to show it.
Right. I mean, a lot of exciting new stuff, including, this is what DiPaolo's been doing on the Nick DiPaolo show. This was tweeted out by Crowder in June. And you don't full.
This is when Crowder was like, I got to get this guy on my show.
Yeah, here we go, brother.
How'd you like to be a cop? Can you imagine wanting to be a cop? Who would want to be a cop? What do you get, $40,000 a year, maybe?
Actually,
Most
in
of
New
those
York,
cops,
you
they
make a
do
ton
the-
of cash, and you retire after 20 years. I knew a bunch of cops. Actually, when I did B Cops, I hung around with a bunch of cops to learn about it, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
They're entrepreneurs.
You know the places that pay cops that kind of money? The only place that pays cops under $40,000 a year, it's not like, New York because they're defunding cops. It's Mississippi.
Yeah.
And it's Arkansas, Louisiana, South Carolina, West Virginia, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, North Carolina. Those are the places that pay under $50,000 a year.
$1,000 a year, maybe? Most of those cops, they go out to New Jersey, the suburbs, have a nice quiet beat. Did you see any cops or security bashing people over the head? It's what you got to do. That's the only way this is going to stop. You can't just stand there, but if they do that, in today's climate, with Alvin Bragg as a day in New York, you're going to go straight to jail. Not the scumbags who are interrupting people trying to go to work. What the
Yeah, there you go. There's some real wordsmithing. And but
by the way, those were protesters that were protesting the chokehold death of Jordan Neely, and police have ID'd those guys, so they're not just letting them go.
Go ahead.
Battalions.
The replatforming begins.
Intensely.
Oh, Brian Callen, August 8th.
That shows you how fucked up this country is. Like, I don't buy it. It's all
Ryan
funny.
Callen.
This case needs to be blown up. The ATF needs to be held accountable.
I think that was Brian Callen's trainer.
Why can't we not condemn evil behavior?
Mug Club brings you the
Every
first
single one of you watching or listening right now needs to flip a switch in your head where you will make those sons of bitches embarrassed that they ever even thought of asking that compromise.
August 8th. Oh, so he's doing a network. He's gonna bring DePaulo's show on and Callen's show. I know Callen from back in the day as well. Not that bright. At one point he had a show. I think he was going to have me on. Then I think he realized he doesn't want to do it. It's sort of like a libertarian workout type of situation.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, what could this be about?
And well, now of course, this is weird. We're looking at Steven Crowder's Rumble views. Now, Rumble views are weird, it seems to me. Like there's a real disparity. It's really sort of fascinating how many viewers people seem to have on Rumble. And I'll tell you what's amazing to me about this. We ebb and flow in terms of viewers. We're at sort of like a higher mark now than I think we've been in.
We were flowing after Crowder. We embarrassed Crowder.
Well, you get a spike. Spikes happen all the time, depending on if you're in the news or this and that. But we were at the highest point we were at prior to almost now, I think, was in February of 2020. Right before COVID, right, when Bernie dropped out, we had, I don't want to say a precipitous drop, but I think everybody had a precipitous drop because everybody's behavior changed because they're not watching. But within a couple of months, we were back, within a month or two, we were back to where we were. And it wasn't, it was a drop, but it wasn't wasn't a 50% drop. It was but a 20% drop, 30% drop. You get nervous because you don't know where this is going. If I was Steven Crowder right now, I got news for you, and I'll tell everybody in the office. If this happens to us, I'm going to be on the floor. You're going to come in here, and I'm going to be in the bathroom crying, and everybody's there. We're going to be selling furniture in here, and I'm going to freak out. I'm telling you that right now.
Oh yeah.
If we go from 2.5 million views in the second week of March to about 750,000 views in July, it's over. I'm going to be so panicked, I'm not even going to be able to talk.
Where was that one spike there? Was that when
that was probably
going
when
down?
his wife, I would imagine that's when the stuff. Check and see. That was it appears to be in the first week of May. I would bet that spike is a function
of
the interpersonal drama, people getting a little curious.
and I would actually guess that spike at the end of of July.
You are right. It was on May 2nd to May 13th, around like that was the coverage.
And fucking watch it was April 28th, so right before.
And what was the part? When was the stuff about him sending dick pics? Was that in maybe? Let's see. I'm looking at that like
that spike there,
June-ish. I mean, but nevertheless, like he's dropping like a lead balloon. It's so strange. How do you go from January 1 up to 2.5 million views, and then as if like it honestly looks like on March 1st, it almost looks like a welcome program. Right? I mean, it's just sort of weird that it's so tied to the beginning of the month in that way.
I think because, like, Jason Campbell, who posted this of Root Meter Matter, says Crowder's influence has plummeted over the past year. He's made a career out of creating a show as ugly as he is. Now people are finding it. I think there's a little bit of a mix of things. I think that's definitely happening, and I don't think the divorce was good for his image. But I think there was a little bit of an artificial boost given to him by Rumble at the start of...
You are speculating that people who have been paid to go on Rumble or have been invited on to Rumble by, Sachs or whoever these right-wingers are, what you're speculating, Matt, just so we're clear, is that when they come, and a lot of these people are paid, a lot of if you know the names of somebody on Rumble, anybody who hears my voice knows the name of somebody on Rumble, I got news for you. They're paid to be on Rumble. I don't know how long that contract.
Say they're on the left.
I don't know who, which is fine. Fine, get paid. But let me ask you this: do we have a way of verifying ad views? Like, how much is ad sales, or I should say ad sales on Rumble? Because if you don't have advertisers buying on the ad sales, you really don't need to have that much integrity with your numbers.
No, because then it's not fraud.
Or even if there are ways to create numbers. I mean, YouTube, polices it, as far as I know, because they're at advertising sales for them is a big deal.
But even YouTube has recently been in trouble for getting views off of autoplays on embeds. And so if YouTube is
Facebook was doing stuff like that too.
And YouTube and all these different ones do it, I don't know.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing.
Of course.
But here's the thing, is that it's very hard to change people's behaviors. I mean, you hear all the time, like, I don't like the take that, I don't like that Sam said this, or I don't like on this show that they said that. Maybe you can see a dip in their numbers. That happens. But to drop down to literally a fraction, like, I can't do the math, but it's to have a 4 times drop over the course of 4 months.
Yeah, not even that long a time.
I've never seen anything like that before. Yeah. It's almost as if somebody said, no, and just flicked a switch. Yeah. And then just things start to really precipitously drop.
I gotta be honest. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody take so many L's in the
last few years.
In the last few years, just right,
even Rubin
haymaker figuratively
because
to the
Crowder,
face, but much like when the union guy punched him.
Crowder's burning bridges, and even Dave Rubin, who's on vacation now, he's just reposting Jimmy Dore videos.
Oh, is that what he's doing?
Yeah, actually, maybe we can pull it up
Old
a little
colleagues.
bit. But it's like, hey, I'm on vacation now, but I'm sure this video is really great, and it's 2 minutes of Jimmy Dore going off on Anderson Cooper. It's very odd.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of business and that goes on.
But I'm saying that's a smart move for Rubin, whereas Crowder's just he's against us and Candace Owens, which is a little bit of a multi-front war going on.
I think he just got a little too big for
he's
his
in
britches.
love with the truth.
Yeah. Oh, right. No truth without love, and so that's why we showed this graph to you, Stephen, with love.
But and folks, I would check out tomorrow. Apparently, is the big day. The big relaunch.
Look forward to that. I mean, actually, that's the funny thing is I am very happy that he is burning more of Rumble investors' money by giving it to Nick DiPaolo and the gun guy that he had there really quickly, and Brian Callen.
Maybe with all that, that's what that fire in the ad is to represent the burning of his
venture
career.
capitalist money. Yeah. David Sachs, thank you for the check.
And just another aside, can right wingers just retire the Mission Impossible font? It's the only thing they've got going on in that ad. It's just it's not a substitute for being a tough guy. Please.
Let's play a clip. We reported on this. There's sort of like been a rolling strike for a couple of months now with LA hotel workers. And here is one that happened over the weekend. LA hotel workers action. Members of Unite Here, this is local 11, are outside the Fairmont Miramar Hotel in LA. And police were called to disperse them. And it's like, I think these are all police, but some of them also look like the hotel security guards, right?
It was a combo, of hotel security and police.
And I don't know if, watch what's going on here. I like at least that there's one cop saying to one of these like Pinkertons essentially, and they're not literally from Pinkerton. I don't know what security firm they're from. Like, hey, buddy, just because you're security does not mean you get to physically assault people. That's for us.
Yeah.
We're the physical assaulters. But some of them, like, I just don't understand how. I get it. They're security. They don't get deputized to be able to beat up people.
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of private security that does that stuff. I mean,
of course,
that happened like by not to, it's a weird thing to remember, but like the Wembanyama security like hit Britney Spears when she tried to say hi to him or whatever.
Yeah.
It really is a good demonstration of what cops' real function is. It's, to protect property,
without a doubt,
to protect capital.
Well, that's when people ask, like, on a hypothetical reason, like, why aren't cop unions part of the labor movement? It's like, if they start acting like part of the labor movement, then we'll accept it as part of the labor movement. But typically, it's opposed to it. But there's this stuff going on with the APSA conference, and a lot of justifications for folks. It's I believe a psychology conference. I don't know if you can look that up, Bradley, but like a conference going on, and people are saying things like, it's privileged to be able to not cross a picket line, like, because people like, and like the way this those who are able to cancel,
Who's
please.
saying that?
Well, one of the people who's crossing the picket line.
Oh, how convenient!
It's the American Political Science Association.
Please be aware that it takes privilege to stand in complete solidarity with workers, which I would just say is why, like,
wait,
I don't.
What?
Yeah, that's why I don't care about privilege
I'm
discourse.
not quite sure about that. I mean, do they want to put the hardship that they're going to go through versus the people who are actually on the picket line?
That's what they want to do. They say, hey, younger scholars who aren't of means and people of color are going to be affected by this picket. And it's like, that's a picket. Sorry.
That was the American Political Science Association?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, that's
Political Science Association. That's right.
That's just another example of liberal indoctrination on college campuses.
And kind of literally.
Yep. Well,
as opposed to like
liberal in the actual sense, as opposed to the ones that right wingers employ.
Right.
Last week we reported, I think it was midweek, that the AMPTA, what is it? AMPTP had said they want to sit down and have talks with the WGA. And apparently, absolutely, F all came out of that. We know that you'll recall, like with I think it was the actors strike, the producers said, give us another 14 days. maybe it was 12 days past the deadline to work this out. And it turns out that they just basically were waiting so that they could get enough promotion for some of their summer movies. So
For
you're not
Barbie
allowed.
and Oppenheimer.
It wasn't just for Bobby and but it certainly in part was a function of trying to get some of their summer movies to get promotional stuff. You need the actors to come out on when they're striking. They won't do it.
And Barbie just made $1 billion, so enough money to pay the actors and writers.
3 times over.
Yeah.
Practically. But actually, it says it made $1 billion, but we spent a lot of money on paying ourselves to promote it. So we got to pay off us first. Nothing came from that WGA meeting with the ATMP. But here is Adam Conover, who was on the program a couple of weeks ago, talking about some of the things that, like, for instance, Universal attempted to do to stop them from picketing. They don't want people in LA to know that this is going on.
As soon as we started striking and we started picketing here at Universal, they started breaking up the sidewalk so that we couldn't move from gate to gate. It was very dangerous. We've picketed like this for 3 months. We got a petition with 26,000 signatures insisting that Universal add sidewalk safety features. And you know what? They conceded. They are finally adding those because of the solidarity and power that our members and captains and lot coordinators showed. And we're out here today celebrating that. I mean, they didn't want to put the sidewalks in, not because of the expense, but because, they didn't want us to be able to picket. They hate picketing. They wanted to make it as hard for us as possible. So as soon as we started out here with signs, they said, let's tear up the fucking sidewalks, right? They did it on purpose. But first of all, it's not legal to do that. It's union busting. And second of all, we're not going to let them. We brought public pressure to bear because they didn't just hurt us. They hurt everybody. They hurt people who live in this area who just need to walk down the street. And so we're not going to let them do that. And we won, just like we're going to win the strike overall. I mean, if we don't win, then we're not going to have careers to go back to in a couple years because the companies are trying to turn our careers into gig work. They're trying to end writing and acting as viable middle-class professions in America, and we're not going to let them do that. And we're out here on strike to make sure that they don't. And that's really empowering when you know that you need to show up to save your job, you do it. And that's why you see hundreds, thousands of people on our picket lines every single day.
I will say also just that last point about, I've seen people say they're not middle-class workers. I know electricians and plumbers who make an incredible amount of money because, I don't know, they turned it into a business. They ended up hiring a bunch of other plumbers and electricians. I mean, I also know electricians and plumbers who make a solid sort of like working class amount of money. It is a similar dynamic in the context of writing and acting. It's not hard to find people who were in your favorite show 6 months ago now driving a Lyft or having to work, other gig jobs. It is not, and certainly it's not the money that it was 30 years ago when I was in it. There was a lot more money associated with it. If you saw somebody on TV for an extended period of time, they would have money for a while. It is not like that anymore. Meanwhile, on that meeting between the WGA and the AMPTP, a much anticipated meeting, this is from Variety, between WGA Chief Negotiator Ellen Stutzman and the WGA West General Counsel Tony Segal ran about an hour Friday afternoon at the Sherman Oaks headquarters of the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. I don't know who came from the AMPTP. Sources said the WGA duo made clear that the Guild, and this is there's a couple of things here that are pretty impressive, will not bend on the proposals to establish minimum staffing levels in episodic TV. That's basically like, you need to hire X number of writers for each show. You can't do this thing where you now hire one writer, you work them to death, and then you bring in other people to do punch up because it makes it impossible for people to make a living that way. And a guaranteed a minimum number of weeks of employment. Because a lot of times what they'll do is they'll just say, look, we're going to bring you in for a week or two. And because of the nature of the business, it also makes it very hard for them to get other gigs. The AMPTP has called those proposals non-starters and gave no indication on Friday that they're prepared to change that position. This is what I think they brought them in, though, for. The SAG-AFTRA strike, which began on July 14th, has added another complicating factor in negotiations with writers. I mean, as I read this is what I'm getting out of this. Sources said, this is coming from the WGA, right? Or maybe, I don't think it's coming from the AMPTP. Said Stutzman, or maybe it is. I mean, just listen to
hear
this.
The quote first, yeah.
Stutzman and Siegel indicated that even if the WGA gets a deal, writers will still want to honor all picket lines.
Oof.
That would essentially mean that no one could return to work until both strikes are resolved. That irked some on the management side who saw that as adding an additional demand on top of the issues already on the table. Now, I don't know. I am of two minds as to who leaked that. My guess is that it's coming from the producers, because virtually every leak comes from the producers. If you're Variety, if you're Hollywood Reporter,
trade publications.
If you're a trade publication, you side with the bosses because that's where your bread is buttered.
Oh yeah.
And
by the way, who's writing this article? Hollywood Reporter?
Cynthia Littleton. Oh, I think I might even know her. Jean Mattias. I wonder. I think.
But what's the outlet?
It's Variety.
It's Variety, right? Yeah. Well, never. I mean,
but here's the tip off for me. There's no. It irked some on the management side. You're not getting any explanation from the worker side.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the explanation for the worker side is pretty obvious, right? We're not going to let them divide us. If we have more power as a union, then we have more power as two unions. Yeah. And you would, if the source was coming from that side, you would hear that. They say this irked some on the management side. And I think why they leaked this is because what management wants to do now is to sow dissension amongst the unions. They want to pit the unions against each other, and they want to create dissent within the union. And particularly with the writers' union, they have always been less about solidarity than I think SAG-AFTRA. When the writers had their strike last time, there was a lot of internal dissension. They're much more unified this year, but not hard to find wealthy writers who are going to say, hey, why are we doing this? I'm striking with WGA, not with SAG. I'm not an actor. And I think that's why we hear this leak. In fact, I would bet that's why this meeting even took place, is that management knew they weren't going to get any concessions. They knew the demands that were out there. They wanted to create a reason to be able to leak this.
The thing that hopefully holds it together too is the fact that the demands for the writers and the actors are so similar in that it does come down to residuals, right? As one of the central claims or central demands. So hopefully that is able to bind them together in a way that you can resist this kind of external pressure. I don't know.
I mean, this is just to be clear. When you get these things, and it's always going to be the AMPTP that is leaking, it seems to me, always. Because the union is pretty straightforward with what they want. And, the union doesn't have the information. When they meet, they don't meet, they don't know whether Warner or Sony has this agenda or that agenda. They don't know how that all shakes out per se. And they know that they're not getting that information, and they're not going to put it. And frankly, Variety is not going to leak it. And so this is all about striking at the solidarity amongst the writers to try and pry them apart from SAG and to basically use the leverage. I mean, it's basically a wedge.
The contrast between those two clips shows kind of the why capital wins legally is just legally preferred. So like you have this famously the writer's strike. There was those trees that were cut down, right? Like and Los Angeles has fined Universal Studios for that. They fined them $250. Whereas you hear like all these other strikes of like whether the security people beaten up, but like the John Deere protesters, like you can protest here, but you can't protest there. And if you protest there, then we're going to sick people with batons on you. And that's why capital wins, because these sorts of like, the legal system prefers it.
Yep. This is an important story. I want to mention this. Mississippi has or had a lifetime ban on certain felons. I'm not sure which crimes that you could commit that would, after you served time, you got out, you were not allowed to vote for the rest of your life. Doesn't matter if you were 20 when you committed this crime. Doesn't matter if you were 80 when you committed the crime. You would not be able to vote for the rest of your life. Now, a lot of times this is challenged. It's been challenged in the past under like the 14th Amendment, right? Not getting due process. A panel of Fifth Circuit judges, according to the Washington Post, ruled 2-1 in favor of plaintiffs who were looking to have their voting rights reinstated, writing that the section at issue in Mississippi State's Constitution, quote, ensures that they will never be fully rehabilitated, continues to punish them beyond the term of their culpability requires, and serves no protective function to society. So one of the ways of being rehabilitated is to have full rights as a citizen, to be able to vote on who is representing you. And the Mississippi State Constitution, which denies that right to vote, and we should say this comes from 1890. Folks, I'll give you 3 seconds to catch up with me here, but this is the pushback to Reconstruction, right? And once the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment passed, then these slave-owning states, they roll out constitutions, they go to the Supreme Court. Jim Crow, ladies and gentlemen. In so excluding former offenders from basic aspect of democratic life, often so long after their sentences have been served, Mississippi inflicts a disproportionate punishment that has been rejected by a majority of the states. In the independent judgment of this court, informed by our precedents, is at odds with society's evolving standards of decency. Where are we going here? This is not about due process. It is about cruel and unusual punishment, which the Constitution has a prohibition against. This is a standard which changes with time. This is also an important concept to understand. 200 years ago, maybe not voting was like, all right, you can't vote. You got a long laundry list of things, that, you can't vote. You're not even a free person. You can't even own property. You can't go eat at a hotel counter. Well, now our standard of what is cruel and unusual, and the unusual part, never mind the cruelty, the unusual part is that you do something and then for the rest of your life, your key function as a member of a democratic society is removed. That is certainly unusual, and it's certainly disproportionate.
And it undercuts the notion that imprisonment is about rehabilitation. Because once you leave prison, you should, first of all, people in prison should be able to vote. But when it comes to this law here, it's essentially saying that you have a black mark on your person for the rest of your life.
It's a cancellation.
And you can't vote, right? And you can't vote to change your circumstances. And like the reason that it's racialized in this way too is like you have to look at what became felony convictions as time went on as well, which included drug war stuff, right? And like when people talk about the criminal justice system and mass incarceration being a reproduction of racial hierarchies and racism, this is an example.
And I mean, the bottom line is, Eighth Amendment says excessive bail. You cannot require excessive bail. You cannot require excessive fines, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. I don't know if they find it as unusual or
They're
in
like,
terms of
stopping
excessive fines. Also seems like you're paying with your rights there.
If I was a Republican, I'd say stopping people from voting is unusual. It's like the main thing I do.
The provision applied to felons convicted of crimes that included murder, bribery, theft, and perjury, among other crimes. We have not seen the use of the Eighth Amendment. I mean, maybe it's happened in the past, but it's usually under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. If this decision holds, and I imagine it may go to the Supreme Court, it would affect 30,000 Mississippians who have served sentences for felonies. I mean, that is, in a state like Mississippi, I don't know that it'll make a massive difference. If you could get all of those people to vote, I don't know. But it's going to be interesting because this may open up opportunities. Because
in other states, I mean, and Mississippi's not the only state that has this kind of disenfranchisement law.
DeSantis has been fighting to keep theirs.
Well, this is permanent, right? But what about 30 years, 20 years? Like, I mean, if the Supreme Court lets this stand, that becomes the sort of like the floor, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes, can you raise that bar in terms of like how long, when you strip a person of their rights when they have presumably paid back their debt to society. That's what that's the way that we look at jail time, rightly or wrongly. They have paid back society their debt owed to society. When can you reinstate their rights and it not be cruel and unusual punishment or excessive? So we'll see. But a really interesting case, and we'll see what happens to it. But that just happened, I guess, I don't know, a couple of days ago. So we will see more on that. What should we get to here?
Maybe the DeSantis thing.
Yeah, where did
we didn't include the other DeSantis clip because the full interview's happening tonight, right, Bradley? Yeah.
What interview is this?
Well, he said that Trump lost the election, but it was just a clip, and the full thing is happening tonight. So I think there's more that he's going to say, so we can hold off on that. But this was him
his first NBC appearance for a one-on-one interview with NBC's Dasha Burns.
Mm-hmm. So stay tuned for that.
It'll
tomorrow.
premiere on Lester Holt's slot tonight.
All right, let's see. Which one are we going to do? You're going to have to read it because I completely lost my...
Yeah, so this is DeSantis at a campaign stop in Iowa where he spoke about liberal cities, right? And how people in liberal cities are moving to Florida, the paradise for the anti-woke. Putting aside that I think Miami had its first population decrease in years.
Yeah, and it's all old people that are moving to retire.
Or back to the woke area. I'm not sure, but either
Getting
way.
woke again.
This is like one of his...
It's like a reawokening.
The rewokening, yeah.
The
rewokening begins.
I'll never forget, and I bring up this anecdote a lot because I think it's indicative of DeSantis's issues. When the East Palestine rail disaster happened, Donald Trump went to Ohio and was handing out free McDonald's and water. And DeSantis was doing speeches with cop unions in cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. And so, I don't know. I mean, there has been some polling that the wokeness that he centered his campaign on is kind of fading in importance with Republican voters.
Nobody cares.
And crime is on the uptick. So perhaps he's trying to ride this wave, but he does it inartfully. To use the metaphor, he falls off the surfboard.
Governed by leftist ideology and leftist politicians throughout this country, they have failed. San Francisco failed. LA failed. Illinois. How do I know? Because people move from those places, come to my state, and tell me about how bad it is. You know, sometimes I don't even believe it. I mean, I had a guy tell me, like, you know, in San Francisco, you know, they'll just defecate on the sidewalk. They use drugs out in public, no problem. And I'm like, really? Well, I happened to be in San Francisco a month or two ago, and within 10 minutes of me being in the city, I see some guy relieving himself on the sidewalk with number 2. Like, I mean, it's just, I've never seen things like this before, but it shows you this is driven by leftist ideology.
That really drops like a lead balloon. And I think, you know, part of it is also, you know, supposedly Iowa people are really nice and this and that. But it's sort of like the problem with getting too explicit about this is sort of like the problem that Ron Paul had back in, I think it was in 2008, where he was asked a question about healthcare, and the question was like, well, so what do you do with this person? You know, do you let them die on the street? And Ron Paul was like, yeah, you do. That is, they made bad choices in their life and couldn't afford health insurance, and so yeah, they die. Now, it just also happened that Ron Paul had a campaign person who didn't have health insurance and got really sick. I think that became a big issue. But
that's his
the
fault.
point being is that I think like when you actually like walk people through this situation, it's one thing to say it's dirty, it's disgusting, the homelessness is a problem there. But then to say like, I'm one of the most powerful guys in the country. I am governor of a huge state. I have a lot of resources at my you know, beck and call. And I saw someone who was so desperate that they were having to defecate on the sidewalk. And all of a sudden, like the next thing that pops into your head, if you are even slightly sentient and actually even try and tell yourself that you care about other people, is, well, what did you do about it?
Yeah.
Did you go up to that person and say, can I help you in some way? Like, do you need services? Or did you just sort of like look at it and get back into your limo? Like that moment, I think, there where people are going like, well, wait a second, this is a real human being he's talking about. And it's not some general thing. And he literally had the opportunity to help someone in desperate need. And all he's doing is using as an anecdote, like, what's he going to do if we need help?
I mean, and part of it is just like, I don't think people at the campaign rally in Iowa want to hear about someone doing number 2, like he's talking about there.
Well, yeah.
It's just like,
I think it's just too stark of an image. Like, wait a second. Why are you not talking about what we should do for that person?
Yeah.
If you're going to talk about something so explicit, so problematic that you personally witnessed, and you're only telling that story, not like, you know what, I went to this place and I saw someone who was in peril, and you know, I don't know that I can help more of those people, but my heart bled for this person, and you know, my staffers, and there's a failure of what's going on there to take care of these people. But the funny thing is, he's trying to argue that there's a failure of government that allows for this, but he's not arguing there's a failure to help these people. It's, let me see if he's saying like it's a failure to sort of like
remove them.
yeah. And I mean, but his version of government is that kind of cruelty. This is the guy that was supposedly going to represent Guantanamo Bay prisoners and was there as their advocate, but he sat with, allegedly, the torturers and sneered as they got force-fed Ensure, and when they were hunger striking because their conditions were so bad.
And wasn't even smart enough to deny it when he was asked about it. He literally said, "Who told you that?"
Yeah, I mean, it is his sneering condescension is also paired with what you describe, Sam, as like the casual cruelty. And I mean, he does it without any of the fun that Trump provides for, like, you talked about that op-ed in the Times where I've been to those Trump rallies. There is like this sense of community for those people. They enjoy the charisma of Trump. So when the cruelty comes, it's more of like a part of the showmanship as opposed to what DeSantis represents is like the purest form of what Republican politics are, which is abject cruelty.
And when you personalize it like this, it becomes a problem. Like there's a reason why he denies that thing about Gitmo, and it's not because he thinks he's in some type of legal jeopardy. He denies it because on some level he knows that like torture bad, torture bad, and even though I would imagine anybody in that audience in Iowa would not really care at all about the individual. But he knows torture bad, so he knows enough to like not say like I didn't care about torture. But his assumption is there that no one in that audience cares about that human being who is in a situation where they have to take a crap on the sidewalk. And he thinks that by showing his complete indifference to it, I mean, that's what he's showing. He's exhibiting like, I am completely indifferent to the suffering of that individual, that specific individual that I saw with my own eyes, that was close enough for me to reach out and give the guy a sandwich. And what am I doing with that information? What am I doing with that experience?
Mocking him.
I'm just here to say, like, people come to Florida. And I think that, like, he is so devoid of humanity. Trump at least knows, like, that he is, like, I mean, maybe he never actually, but he's just going to talk about, like, the general decrepitness. There's nothing that's so big I can't even do anything about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got to be president to do something about all of this. I'm going to fix it, he says.
Yeah.
But there's not even like a word of DeSantis saying like, I'm going to fix it.
Oh, yeah. And like, I thought it was all supposed to be fixed, by the way, when Chesa Boudin was ousted. Not so much. And let's be clear what leftist ideology or whatever he's talking about is what leftists want to do. Okay? What leftists want is to make housing a right for people in those kinds of situations, to ensure that houseless people have a place to go so they can go to the bathroom in private. And if they have addiction or mental health issues, at least have it not exacerbated by having to live on the street. What promotes those things in cities is the like right-wing capitalist politics that make those cities more about being pristine tourist centers as opposed to livable situations for all of humanity, to the best of their ability. So it's not leftist ideology. It's the opposite.
Well, it gives it away when they mention places like San Francisco or whatever. If you look at like the murder rates, Florida is higher than California. Like Mississippi, the Mississippi River Delta, per capita. Mississippi River Delta is like insane, the amount of death, and they don't actually care about that. They think that's fine that people die from gun violence. It's just, can you like use it to attack Democrat cities in elections?
I mean, look.
Like Jacksonville
the
has
bottom
a lot
line
of crime
is
issues.
there is no doubt that there is an unhoused problem in some of the major cities in California. The question is like, what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Are you going to treat these people like they're human beings, and provide them housing? And if there's an argument that some of them are, have mental health issues, or they don't want to, or they have addiction issues, you address those too. There's no way to treat people for any of those things if today they're sleeping under an underpass, and tomorrow they're sleeping behind some bushes. There's no way to treat them. All right, let's should we do number 10, or is that opening a can of worms?
You want to save that for tomorrow?
There's two different ones, though, right?
Right, that's what I'm saying. We might
Okay, we'll
wanna...
save that for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, folks. We did not get the phone calls today.
Yeah.
What a jerk.
I mean, we did calls on a good amount of calls on Friday. So.
What a jerk.
We're not that horrible.
Tomorrow we'll do more. Fizzy drinks. Sorry for my callous comment. I didn't see it. I live in San Francisco, and the city's greatest sin is the abandonment of these people. I hate to see the disparity between rich and poor. DeSantis shows nothing but contempt for them. that I think is shared by the leaders of the city. I mean, I think it's, listen, it's broadly shared in society.
Yeah, well, then, look at J.D. Vance blaming immigrants for the fact that nobody can pay rent in this country. Like, it's because they're owned by real estate. Is the simplest answer.
Gabagool. Hey, I'm our crew. After seeing Oppenheimer for the second time this weekend, I felt compelled to write in to defend it. Not showing the bombs physically dropping on Hiroshima and Nagasaki's very intentional artistic decision. Nolan wrote the screenplay in first person. Oppenheimer didn't see them get dropped. He is shown looking at the slideshows of the aftermath and being overwhelmed and having to look away. Well, wait a second. If the argument's in first person, why don't we see his POV of those shots, do we? No, I haven't seen the movie. One of the most intense scenes is him giving his... Okay, I'm not going to do any spoilers, and that is way too long. Anyways, left is best. You know what I would suggest? That's a comment for the Discord. That is, go into the Discord and have that debate. I mean, I haven't seen the movie.
Me neither.
I've seen it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm just not a big Nolan. I wish that the film wouldn't have gotten made if Nolan hadn't made it. But I just think the more I sit with it, I don't really remember much of it, to be honest. Like, it didn't stick with me that much. And I think we need to be treating the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with the appropriate level of outrage.
That is a longer conversation to have. I just remember as a kid when they were like, did you see the Holocaust last night? It was like a mini-series after Roots. Did you see the Holocaust? That was really great. I was like, well, there was a lot of misgivings. Like, wait, are we teaching people about the Holocaust, or are we just sort of commodifying it and making it sort of like episodic?
I just found the movie to be more about scientific, is science going too his scientific brain, is his genius going too far, as opposed to the more political warfare elements. But it was good on the anti-communism stuff. So
can I just recommend 2 movies about the actual bombing that are really great? Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is based off the book by Marguerite Duras, is a great one, and Grave of the Fireflies, which is a anime interpretation of the bombings. Both very, very good.
Oh wow.
I saw The Flash. Salt Lake's
You saw The Flash?
Yeah.
I heard it was horrible.
Oh,
you know what? Actually,
what did you think, Sam?
As far as movies I have to watch with my kid.
Oh, okay. There you go.
I was surprised. I was a little bit surprised. There's a certain pathology there. It was interesting.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to go overboard, but Salt Lake's Lefty. What do you? I mean, it's a simple time travel if you mess things up type of thing. It wasn't a particularly profound conceit, but as far as that, at least it's not like a Marvel.
Well, I mean, it's DC, right? But the film was mired in controversy because the star was, anyway, this is a conversation.
I didn't know
about
that.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Oh God, now I got to explain to Salt.
Yeah.
Salt Lake Lefty, what are your thoughts on sections of the internet calling people scabs at the drop of a dime? I don't think that if you drop any change on the floor, you should be called a scab, but I'm not sure.
But I don't know what this is exactly reacting to, but if it's
Jamie Lee Curtis?
Oh.
I mean,
no.
What did she do?
There was a clip, and she said, I'm hoping she can beat Switzerland in the negotiations. And, that stuff, look, we have to be wary of, say, Variety or someone like that taking it out of context to make it look more...
what is she hoping?
To be Switzerland in the debate between management and the unions.
She should show solidarity with the union.
Exactly, yeah. I think this stuff, you need to be... this is what social media is for.
Yeah.
There's no time for equivocation or maybe that person has a good reason for not showing complete solidarity with the union. No, there's not time for that.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Well, I don't know why, but they did, Deadline, for example, totally misrepresented Damon's comments, right? So you do have to be
that
wary.
They cut off.
Yes.
But that seems.
But also, actors need to get a little bit better at putting it up front, the solidarity, and then any sort of qualifying thing that can be after. Maybe even leave that out entirely.
It's hard. I got
Right.
somebody came and interviewed me when I was I don't know who it was, and you're not sure in that moment. You're sweaty, you're hot, and you're excited, and you're not necessarily planning it out that way, but people get more savvy about it. Vada, soft collar on Monday. What's next? A new shirt on Tuesday? We need to be emotionally prepared for wardrobe changes. This is not a soft collar. It's not a soft collar. It's a real collar.
It's a semi-collar.
It's semi. Tomo Flink. Happy Fun Day Monday, folks. Here in Britain, government has approved over 100 new licenses for offshore drilling. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is trying to convince everyone that this will reduce Britain's dependence on fossil fuels. Interesting. Also, Emma, regarding your decision not to hang out with Tim Pool, were you doing deontology or utilitarianism in that moment?
Oh, it's hard to say. I
I
guess
think they all came up with the same answer.
yeah, they all, right. It was probably more utilitarian, I would say.
Demian, have you all
good.
talked about, are there any guests that you'd love to have but can think of any solid reason to have them? Can't think of any solid reason to have them? I'd love to see you all talk to Brennan Lee Mulligan or Matt, but I'm just not sure why. I'm not sure I even understand the question.
Matt?
I don't know who Brennan Lee Mulligan is.
Me neither.
Oh. Don't know. Militant apathy. By now, I'm sure someone has seen the fight at the pier of the Montgomery, Alabama. Needless to say, it involved a group of white boaters who refused to move so another boat could dock. They jumped a black security guard and a big fight ensued. Strange thing is, Trump was there in Montgomery 12 hours earlier. I believe he thrashes around and decompensates more and more. The energy is going to manifest in his followers. I haven't seen any of that.
The video was kind of awesome, I will say, if that's okay.
I mean, it's the sort of thing that's going to be all over media because it's.
We should see that.
I said it. I said it to you, Sam. You can watch it after.
Okay, great article in HuffPost about Steve Bannon's best friend forever, Ice Cube, says people don't F him with him because he didn't take the COVID vax. All right.
Hey.
Number 13. Why does it do this? One can only help that the Trump team's plan of increasingly abject racism when referring to the DC case lowers the inroads they've gained with black men in recent years. I think their inroads are a little bit overstated, but I doubt it would. I don't know what more you need. Sam's tight pants. I currently subscribe to the theory that Bragg will defer to the feds so that 1/6 the case starts in March 24, while Bragg drifts to later in the calendar year. Well, Bragg has already said so, that he will defer to that case. Bragg has already said that. March 2024 is, like I say, I spoke to someone who was, former U.S. attorney. He thought that was very possible, but we'll see. 502 Drew, what's with the music these freaks always choose for their promo videos? Is there some shitty conservative production company out there just pumping this crap out for them all the time? It may be, I don't know. It may be just like, available. 2, if by fire, maybe the right winger should switch to Comic Sans. All right, 3 more. Kowalski. Kevin and Ronnie better be careful with this word choice. Inflation has hit the state of Florida harder than most, and the cost of living in greater Miami metro, as well as Orlando, is projected to exceed the living expenses in New York City, possibly as early as the end of the year.
Whoa.
This has more to do with the massive housing crisis in the United States as opposed to the way states govern solely, because all major states are run virtually the same way when it comes to housing. Florida is just simply catching up to New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. I mean, we need new housing built across the country. We need government-sponsored housing built across the country. We need to inhibit the ability of hedge funders to buy up all of this property, because it becomes too much of, like, when they commodify it so much, it becomes too easy for them to keep a big chunk of it off the market. We need to get rid of any type of algorithms or computerized B2B businesses that essentially function as antitrust violations in telling people to raise their rents and signaling to all the landlords in a specific area, you can all raise your rents. It's price fixing. Just because it's done through an algorithm doesn't mean it's any different than price fixing. All right, 3 more. MSNBC Seder went to a small... Oh, wait, I didn't even finish that thing, did I? Did I finish Kowalski's thing?
I don't know.
Son of a bitch. Now I can't find it. I mean, there's like 8,000. Oh, here it is. Oh, yeah, I did finish it. All right. Getting old. Jay Tingle. That Ron Paul debate story had a much more salience at the time because a Paul supporter in the audience yelled out, "Let him die."
Oh, Jesus.
Before Paul answered the question. The TV viewing public recoiled from that more than whatever Paul said. He certainly didn't say you shouldn't let him die.
Hey, he speaks his mind.
Eric from San Diego, remember the passage in the Grapes of Wrath where they spray the fruit with kerosene so it could be consumed for free? So it couldn't be consumed for free? Housing in the U.S. is exactly the same thing. Homelessness exists because housing people would cause landlords and real estate capital to lose money. Affluence, wretchedness. Today in Providence, a raid ordered by Mayor Brett Smiley and Governor Dan McKee, both Democrats, displaced about 4 dozen unhoused people who had been living in a tent encampment near the State House. This is the third high-profile raid of this kind in Providence and Pawtucket since December. Local right-wing media has been pushing this, targeting specific encampments in the area, which predictably leads to verbal abuse toward the unhoused people and increased police scrutiny. The sitting housing priority, meanwhile, is giving huge tax breaks to luxury housing developers. And now, the final I am of the day. Tommy Hot Tub. If my memory serves me correctly, a felony only disqualified somebody from voting in the United States after the Civil War. I believe it was one of the pieces of legislation that served to further disenfranchise recently freed and over-incarcerated former slaves. That sounds correct to me. I think it was part of a suite of stuff that came in to fight back against the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, essentially that provided the vote for recently freed slaves. It was very easy to pick them up on any type of violation, around that time.
Well, are we sure they weren't just behaving badly and the states had to do that? It's hard to know.
Tough call. Bradley, Matt, Emma, great job today. Folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better.